everyone.
I'm back, baby.
It's Jake Ciely.
I'm great. Everybody else sucks.
Oh,
no. It's every nightmare I've ever had.
Excuse me?
It's time to check the link.
Pretty crazy, huh? But it doesn't matter because none of this has anything to do with the show.
You know what? You just made the list.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
It's all in football.
Sure, we talk about it all the time. Really? No.
What's up, you dogs? Week 5 is already here. Rankings with Jeff Ratcliffe. As always, make sure you're following him at Jeff Ratcliffe. Tweet at him, even though he's going to ignore you. Just go check out.
I don't ignore, man. I don't ignor.
I know.
Don't make me out the worst. I'm the nice one. You were the one who was rude last week.
Yeah, I came after the. Look, I actually it was a warranted response, I think. But in any case, code all in, all capitals, 20% off at FTN, where you can check out more of Jeff's work. Make sure you're checking out SiriusXM and all that stuff, and checking out The Athletic, theathletic.com/BetsTV, all capitals, and get your first free month. And Jeff, we got a lot going on in week 5 already. It's week 5 of the season. It seems every single week we got a new running back situation to talk about. And right off the jump, we have Damian Williams is back as a starter. We've seen Damian Williams before with the Chiefs, and now he is starting for the Bears. Perfect timing, because we got breaking news before we kind of came on the show, Jeff, is that Matt Nagy has relented. He is officially going with Justin Fields as the quarterback for the foreseeable future, whatever that might be under the term of what Matt Nagy is. But that being said, does that change your opinion after what your opinion was on Damian Williams to start?
No, because I did expect Justin Fields to play this week. And I know we're going to draw a lot of conclusions from the Browns game. The Browns are a very good defense. Let's be clear about that. And if I have Justin Herbert this week, I'm very aware of how good the Browns defense is. I thought Justin Fields wasn't that bad last week. And they did what they're supposed to do with a rookie quarterback. They covered him up. You don't need to do that for the duration of the season, but get his feet wet. Get him a little bit of confidence. And they did do that. Allen Robinson catching some deep passes. I know everybody's losing their minds over Allen Robinson. They had 17 passing attempts. He had 3 targets. Like, that's fine. That's not a big deal. Darnell Mooney, obviously, with one of the prettiest thrown balls I've seen all season. Man, Justin Fields, when he unleashes that thing, it is beautiful.
I keep saying. Everybody was talking about Zach Wilson in the pre-draft camp stuff, and it was like that rollout. Remember when he was inside the dome and he rolled out and threw it all the way opposite?
I think it was Daniel Jeremiah's reaction really that got people going on that one.
But the point, yes, but my point is that 2 weeks before that, Justin Fields had just done it, and nobody was talking about Justin Fields. You know this, Jeff. I kept saying this as we were heading up to the NFL draft. I have rarely seen a quarterback more crapped on for his, like, what it's usually, you know this, you do rookies, we go into the draft, this is what's good about him, this is why he could be a first round, this is why he could be a breakout. And Justin Fields was the complete opposite. It was, this is what he does wrong, this is why he's going to fail, this is why he doesn't fit right now in the NFL.
There is something that's happening though among fantasy football folks that is really, it's really increased over the last couple of years. We're not draft nicks. Like Jake and I, we go to the combine when we're able to, but we're not draft nicks. We're not there to scrutinize these guys and tell you every last thing that's wrong with them. We're not draft scouts. We're not draft nicks. We're none of the above. And in fantasy, instead of finding all the reasons why we shouldn't like players, we really should be finding the reasons why we should. And there are a number of reasons there with Fields. And unfortunately, Jake, I feel like if he went to a different school, if he wore a different jersey, had a different helmet, he may not have gotten these critiques because of the uniform scouts out there saying, oh, Dwayne Haskins didn't do anything. What about JT Barrett? These are completely different players. And really, if Georgia was smart, he should have been the starter in Georgia all along, right from the gate. Jake Fromm, are you kidding me? Starting over Justin Fields. So, it's a complete, but I didn't answer your original question.
Yes. Where is Damian Williams in your rankings?
I feel a lot better about Damian Williams this week than I did about Chuba Hubbard last week. I wasn't sure what the results were going to be with Chuba Hubbard. I had said, hey, we could see a lot of Royce Freeman. I honestly did not expect to see that much Rodney Smith, but it showed us that he wasn't what Mike Davis was last year, a guy who they felt confident enough to just plug in as a 3-down guy.
Yep.
Damian Williams is that guy. They've already felt confident enough to have him in the passing game. He's not a great runner, but he's not a bad runner. And that offense, I still think is going to cover up Justin Fields. So this is a great scenario. We'll see some Khalil Herbert, of course, but it's actually a great scenario. Also, Jake, anytime you see those timetables, right? Because it was 4 or 5 weeks. And after 5 weeks is the bye week.
Yeah.
So it's going to be that entire time. So if you have Damian Williams, you got a starter for the next month for fantasy and RB2 in not a bad situation.
So 2 quick things before I respond to that is one, to answer Deesh's question, and then I think Raul Duke understands what the shirt is, which is Duke is whatever you go by. I'm glad you got it. So if you don't know, this is what we do in the shadows. And this is Nandor. Nandor. I say Nando because Nandor. So everybody knows Nando. And he knows he hates Nando. But anyway, this is when he was playing basketball. I'm a wizard. That's what he is. But it's as the Super Mario Brothers situation. So it's there's a lot of levels to this shirt, Jeff. And you're just like, but the thing is, you have to know what we do in the shadows first before you even get to the Super Mario and I'm a wizard and all that type of stuff. Anyway, Damian Williams, 100% with you. It's funny, I actually have him back-to-back almost with Chuba Hubbard, but definitely on board with Damian Williams. This is as a sidebar, strategy-wise. I tweeted this out yesterday, Jeff. You might have seen it. I didn't think it was going to blow up like it did, but I said, I don't know who needs to hear this, but you can never have enough running backs. You can never have too many running backs, because I saw a lot in the waiver columns saying, hey, Damian Harris is my 4th running back. Do I still go get Damian Williams with my first waiver priority, or do I still pick him up because I could go get, and it was guys like Kadarius Toney or Henry Ruggs, who I love Henry Ruggs, but no, you cannot have enough running backs. We have bye weeks coming up, and if nothing else, Jeff, it's a trade chip, and you're blocking your opponent. Like, don't just give your opponent the opportunity to pick up an RB2.
Yeah, I partially think that. I think that blocking the opponent thing's more end game strategy though than it is. We're not quite open anymore, but we're still early in the season. But I do agree that,
I mean, blocking them from just a free help, like you just let them pick up an RB2 when you can stop them from picking up an RB2.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of hoarding going on, but you pointed out probably the most important thing: bye weeks. If you just draft starters and bench, you're going to suck during the bye weeks. I'm going to tell you that flat out.
I got a lot of people, Jeff, telling me, like, hey, I have a trade and I can trade away. I have Chris Carson. We're going to talk about Chris Carson. It's the first name that came to mind because it was a lot, and this is before injury. So maybe Damian Harris, whatever it might be. A low-level RB2, and they're like, I have this guy in my flex. Should I trade him to upgrade my wide receiver? And then their next running back is like an A.J. Dillon.
Yeah.
Or something like no, like, first of all, you don't even have a second running back to start when bye's coming up, and you're thinning out your running back of, like, look at the people right now that are panicking as Joe Mixon, Chris Carson owners because running back is so, you cannot have enough running backs.
And also, Jake, too, like, should I drop A.J. Dillon for Samaje Perine or whatever? I mean, I guess that's maybe not the best example because Perine may play this week, maybe the starter this week, but when you're dropping
Jarrett
a handcuff,
Patterson.
Yeah, sure. Or whoever, you're dropping a handcuff for a handcuff. That player only has value if the starter goes down. Otherwise, it's just implied value. So if you say, who would I want more? I keep answering people like, it's the same guy. Like, I cannot predict injuries, except for Raheem Mostert. But I cannot predict injuries, so I can't really tell you who I want out of those guys. It's just implied value. And by the way, if you have Tony Jones right now, there's no implied value because he's hurt.
He's now INR. And then there's not even a clear situation behind it between the next Ty Montgomery and Dwayne Washington.
And Divine Ezigbo, who they signed.
I actually said that in the waiver column too. I have a section next man up, and it's the high level next man up, like A.J. Dillon. But I brought that, I used that as an example. I said, if you told me both lead running backs got hurt, and it was Wayne Gallman and A.J. Dillon, I want A.J. Dillon. But if Mike Davis gets hurt first, I'm going to want Wayne Gallman. And that's what it comes down to is, like, I'm with you. I was like, I'm not really trying to chase backups unless there's a potential like Joe Mixon, as you brought up for this week. So let's talk about the Joe Mixon situation. I'm assuming, like Dalvin Cook last week, that if he plays, you just play him and you understand that there's a risk there. But if there is no Joe, you're shaking your head yes. So yes for everybody that is listening to the podcast. But if it is Samaje Perine, how high does he go up? Like Chuba Hubbard, higher or lower than Chuba Hubbard? Are you worried about Chris Evans? Because I actually think Evans is a better all-around running back, but I still would say Perine first. So for me, I'm putting P. Ryan. If Mixon is out, P. Ryan would still be behind Hubbard for me.
Evans is a more intriguing all-around talent, that's for sure, but he doesn't have the experience that Samaje P. Ryan has. So, and they showed at the end of the game last week, P. Ryan was in there. I would have him ahead of Hubbard. I don't think there's as much competition for touches. Now, Hubbard, I'm still not very bullish on after last week. I do just have him as a flex option at 25. So P. Ryan would slide in ahead. So he'd be a back-end RB2. I just don't know what to think here. Adam Schefter says one thing, the head coach says another, and they're two very different things. Week to week and day to day mean very different things.
Yeah, they do.
We're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, and why that's telling for everybody out there, if you don't remember, last year Joe Mixon was week to week and never played like that. So if he's not day to day and it is week to week, that is potentially severely worrisome. Chris Carson's situation, obviously we'll know more as the week progresses. This is only Wednesday before we even got their practice report. So tomorrow, Thursday, depending on when you're listening to it, this might be the decision you're making. But let's say Chris Carson plays, because this one's a little different than Joe Mixon. If Chris Carson plays and barely practiced this week, how much confidence do you have in him, Jeff? Because he's already splitting more touches than he thought they would. And if he's out, how high do you move Alex Collins?
It's a good question. Alex Collins is not a special player. He's a ultimate just a guy type.
He's got special hair.
Well, there's that. There's that. He's got that going for him, which is nice. But I mean, you probably are in a position where you're going to have to use him. I'm thinking, I don't think I can put him in anything more than flex, because of course, we push all the chips in the middle for Alex Collins, and we're seeing like Travis Homer like crazy in that game. So I don't want to predict that though. So I think flex
Alex Collins or Mike
reasonable.
Davis.
Well, Mike Davis at this point, he's playing the snaps.
He's still getting the snaps. He's still getting almost 3 times as many snaps and opportunities.
Wayne Gallman looked better than him, though. And you got to figure if we can see that, the coaching staff can see that.
Yeah, I mean, look at what happened with the Ravens. And Tyson Williams was clearly the best one, but he couldn't pass block, so see you later. You're not even active. Just that one factor. That, again, this is how important pass blocking is. So, but you didn't answer which way are you going? Mike Davis or Alex Collins? Because I would go Alex Collins at this point.
Yeah, I think Alex Collins, I agree with you.
How about this one? Miles Sanders or Alex Collins? Because I know you've seen it, Jeff. We're not the first to realize it. We're not the first to say it. We're not the first to anything. Like, everybody's out there and saying, clearly, Miles Sanders better if you think the Eagles are going to win. The problem is how many games do you think the Eagles are going to win? Yeah. And they're facing Carolina this week. It is in Carolina, and Carolina's defense took a huge step back against the Cowboys. But this isn't the Cowboys. So do you think the Eagles are going to win this game? Because I think that's your answer of Sanders versus Collins, is it not?
I think it honestly is going to have to be Collins. Yeah, I'm really surprised the team just does not want to run the football outside of Jalen Hurts, but they don't want to run the football. We've heard, there's. It's funny when news comes around that is not news and is something that we've known for 2 months. Like, oh, there's pretty much a timeshare. Yeah, no kidding. They brought in a head coach who last year had a timeshare in his backfield. And the timeshare split is very simple. You don't have to even know football to see early down runner, passing down back. They drafted a passing down back who they got a great deal on because he opted out last year in Kenny Gainwell. And lo and behold, here we are. Timeshare. No, it's not a huge surprise. Yeah, it's a shame of Miles Sanders, but I don't think you can use him ahead of Alex Collins if Carson doesn't go.
All right, so let's backtrack back to those Falcons. What are we doing with Cordell Patterson at this point, Jeff? I mean, like,
sell high.
No, but we can, that's the thing is we can't unless you're in an experienced league. So it's like I had this discussion with Pat Mayo yesterday. If you're in if people have played fantasy football and know what they're doing, you can't sell high because everybody knows. There's nobody on earth who's sitting there who's played at least one season of fantasy football who's sitting there being like, oh, yeah, let me go get Cordero Patterson. I believe he's top 20. I believe he's the second best running back in fantasy football. But that being said, is like, where do you draw the line? Because there is the experience, and I threw this one out there, Jeff, and I think this is something that experienced leagues could get done, and I would do in a heartbeat. It wouldn't even be a second thought. Sell Cordero Patterson for somebody like Damian Harris.
Sure, especially this week where he should run a ton. That's another player.
Would you sell Patterson for a buy low on Carson or Miles Sanders or those kind of concerns?
I haven't wanted either one of those guys from the gate.
So you're keeping Cordell Patterson.
Well, I don't have Cordero Patterson though. That's the thing. I didn't pick him up because the guy's, he's like record-breaking efficiency right now that is not sustainable.
Do you know his touchdown percentage on a per touch basis?
No,
11%. 11 for everybody out there.
Antonio Gibson in college.
I was gonna say it's a ridiculous number because I saw somebody who's like, "Well, how's it so much different than LeGarrette Blount?" I was like, LeGarrette Blount scored 16 touchdowns on 300 carries. 300. Do the math. That's not 11%. If it was 11%, he would have scored 34 touchdowns. He did not score 34 touchdowns.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. I think if anything, it's really confirmed my suspicions on Mike Davis starting out the season. I just didn't buy. Like, this guy's not a feature back in the NFL. He did an admirable job last year, but if he was going to be a feature back in the NFL, it would have happened before this point.
Right.
And then you get Gallman in there who looks better. Gallman's just a guy, but, we've seen Gallman be RB2 for stretches. So if there's opportunity, and the really staggering thing is expected fantasy points. So, Jake, I don't know if you saw this over at ftnfantasy.com. We do have the expected fantasy points.
Code all in 20% off.
Yeah, we're Rat Pack for not as much. You can use his code. So
that's really funny.
It is kind of funny. Mike Davis right now is 5th among running backs in expected fantasy points. The only running backs with more Najee Harris leads the league. Derrick Henry, who's been crazy efficient. DeAndre Swift, who's had all those receiving opportunities, and then Jonathan Taylor. So he's getting all of these opportunities. Like, expected fantasy points, I know you don't have to tweet me. It's not going to get you anything in your expected fantasy points league, but it means opportunity. That's the whole point. He's had the opportunities. He's failed to capitalize on them. I don't think regression is going to set in a favorable way here.
I was searching real quick to see where he's. See, that's the thing. On top of it, they're using Cordero Patterson inside the 10 because Mike Davis only has 3 rushes in goal to go. 3. And 1 and a goal line rush, which is for everybody out there inside the 5. So he's got 3 inside the 10 and 1 inside the 5. That's just telling you, like, even the expectancy isn't really much there because I was looking at it, he's only got 1 touchdown in the season. So I'm trying to find Cordero Patterson. Yeah, Cordero Patterson has 2 and 1. They're basically splitting it. And Cordell Patterson is not Mike Davis in that type of running back. Obviously, he's somebody that is not technically a running back at all. So let's talk about a little concern. I see some of the questions. I'm going to get to them before we get to wide receivers. Going to use that as the transition. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jeff, it's been a nice 2 weeks. He's bounced back remarkably in his opportunities, mostly because of touchdowns. But here's a little bit of a concern in last week's game. Darrell Williams was out there for almost 50%. Are you looking at the past 2 weeks and say, you know what? I'm taking the good. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is getting touchdown opportunities. I don't need him to touch the ball 70% of the time. Or are you taking the path of this Darrell Williams thing is something that we should be looking at more importantly than the touchdowns?
Well, I guess it's a little bit of both, isn't it? He got it done when he was supposed to 2 weeks ago. That was the make or break game. If he didn't do it then, he was never going to do it. And then the yardage was good last week, but Andy Reid going back to the old mainstay that we saw last year is not encouraging. It's another reason, too, that if you want to stockpile running backs, you could do a lot worse than Darrell Williams right now. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was really the beginning of the running back dead zone for me, so I don't have any shares of him this season. But, I know a lot of people thought he was going to take a big step forward. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I think he's just going to be an RB2 every week, and we're just going to have to live with it.
All right. I have him a little bit slightly higher. Where did you stop at RB2? Like, would you say RB 15, 16, or more like the 18, 20?
As far as where I'd have him weekly?
Yeah, kind of like
this week I have him at 20.
Okay, so you're more in the middle, low. Yeah, and I'm kind of like just above the mid-high. Yeah, all right, so we're just a little bit different, but we're not that far apart. Last situation.
Why do you love him?
I know. I got into that the other day. I was with, what was it? With Pat, I'm trying to remember who it was. He had like somebody, I think it was like Nick Chubb. He had like 12. I was like, why do you hate Nick Chubb? This situation we hate. We hate it because we can't get a firm grasp on where the value is going to be touchdown-wise, and he's taking them away from Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is not rushing. Kyler Murray is still running. He's just not running at the goal line because now James Conner is running at the goal line. James Conner, the past 2 weeks, Jeff, leads all of football by a gap with 7 rushing attempts inside the 10 and 4 inside the 5. He has obviously turned those into 4 touchdowns the past 2 weeks. But Chase Edmonds, even during this, has been an even split, and he's still an RB2. How confident are you in continuing to roll out Edmonds as an RB2? And is James Conner a thing? Like, put it this way. Is James Conner the real LeGarrette Blount with fewer rushing attempts? More like instead of getting 300, he probably ends up with 200.
There's something about this offense that gives me a little bit of pause as my screen is pausing on me right here, which is lovely.
What database did you pull up?
I think I just pulled up our darn sheet, to be honest with you. Here's where I am with Arizona. Something's got to give. Like, the team is 4-0, and I get it, and they look really good. But can you sustain DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore, Max Williams, James Conner, and Clyde Edwards, James Edmonds, Clyde Edwards Lair too, and Chase Edmonds? Can you sustain all of those guys? No, you can't. Nobody can. So something has to give here. And you know what? While the production is there for Conner, I think there's going to be more headaches than we're originally led to believe here with that backfield. And I'm not quite buying in on it. Like, Chase Edmonds has the upside. We saw him rip off the longer run last week, and that helps. And when you get goal line carries, that's great. But I don't think this is all sustainable here for the Arizona Cardinals. I think they're still going to be a good team, don't get me wrong. But sustaining that many fantasy options, I just don't see it happening.
Okay, so Edmonds or Mike Davis, rest of the way, you could say Edmonds?
Well, I think you have to, unfortunately.
Okay. No, but I mean, I don't think that's what a lot of people would thought and said at the beginning of the season, even if you were an Edmonds supporter, because you're worried about the split and you're worried that it has to do more. But that split for Atlanta is a lot more pronounced than we thought it might be. So how about Anthony Caruso, Jeff? He wants the permission to drop Juju Smith-Schuster. He would grab Alex Collins. I will say this, Jeff. In a 10-team league, I kind of give the okay on the thumbs up for dropping Juju Smith-Schuster, just because more of Ben than it is Juju at this point. He can't even sustain a second wide receiver, and it's Nigel Harris and Deontay Johnson, and Ben's destroying this entire team, on top of the fact that Juju last year was 800 yards and 9 touchdowns. Like, the whole appeal was that, hey, you know what? He gets back to receiving more. He still gets those touchdowns even if he has less efficiency. But Ben can't. Ben is ruining this team. Like, Pat made the joke yesterday, would the Steelers let him run quarterback in a wheelchair? Like, that's what we're talking about at this point.
I mean, he's not too far away with the hips, plural, injury.
That's what I'm saying.
Juju had 8 targets last week, though. So there is that.
Yeah, I mean, he's been drawing plenty of targets and still hasn't been doing anything. Like, put it this way. If you are running back, how about this? If you're the Carson manager, would you drop Juju Smith-Schuster to go grab Alex Collins?
I mean, let me put it this way. If Juju Smith-Schuster is your worst wide receiver, like, what do you care? Really? Your team is probably really stinking good.
Well, his other options are Devontae Smith and Michael Pittman.
And Jamison Crowder.
Oh, I didn't see Crowder.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where I have these guys. I know I have Crowder as a flex option. I guess
Crowder, when healthy, is legit.
I have Juju below them all. I have Juju at 50.
There you go.
But 50 is still rosterable. That's the problem.
So here's what I'm going to say, and this is what I put in the rankings article this week, Jeff. There was a couple thoughts of like, hey, I've seen you ask these questions. One of them was you can never have too many running backs. Some of it was when I'm trying to decide between a wide receiver 3 and 4, I'm usually chasing upside unless I have 2 big risks at my top 2 wide. But anyway, one of the points I made is when you see people say, I need to drop somebody. And if somebody like Juju Smith-Schuster or J.D. McKissick or something, like, I always keep saying this, Jeff, is overpay. Overpaying a 2-for-1. Even if you're like, I hate how much value I'm giving up. If you slightly improve your team, this goes back to the waiver thing. At least you're not dropping Juju for free for somebody to go pick him up for free. That's the biggest thing is you're losing Juju for nothing. If you trade him in an overpay, at least you gained a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. The other question I would ask is, do you have a top 11 quarterback? Because if you do, you don't need a second quarterback.
Thank you.
Certainly don't.
There's so many people I keep saying, stop holding on to a second quarterback.
Do you have
how about I had somebody the other day was like, I have Darren Waller. Do you think I should drop Tyler Higbee? I was like, yes. When are you ever playing Higbee? I know Higbee's a good tight end to have, but he's still 10th, 11th, 12th. And yeah, but if you can't trade, you don't need him. You're never starting him. You froze again. Unless there you go.
I'm trying to figure out what is slowing my darn computer down. the beauty to live streams right here. I guess you can hear my voice.
Yeah.
So what I would say also in addition is, like, yeah, you don't need Dallas Goedert and Dawson Knox, so you could get rid of that player. Anthony's also asking about picking up Jeremy McNichols. Darrington Evans was designated to return, so I don't know what the shelf life is on Jeremy McNichols either.
Well, and the thing with McNichols is he's not even McKissick. At least, McKissick gets 4 or 5 carries. McNichols gets 1 or 2. So McNichols is all in the passing game, and it's one more week before AJ Brown and Julio Jones come back. So you get one more week out of that one. How about this one? I like this for Deesh. Trade Aaron Jones for Dalvin Plus. I mean, I would trade Aaron Jones for Dalvin immediately if I could absorb, hey, maybe he surprisingly sits this week. But for all intents and purposes, I will take the opportunity to get Cook on the cheap, even knowing that he said he's going to play through his ankle injury.
Yeah, and the options here, Hollywood, Waddle, Ayuk. I mean, you're buying low on Ayuk. Heck, if you could get Hollywood in that, I would do that automatically. Because
people are dropping Ayuk, and I can't tell them that they're crazy at this point.
Yeah, well,
I love the talent, but Shanahan. Yeah, but Shanahan. Shanahan's pulling the running backs. He is with the wide receivers now. Whether or not, I mean, we just sat here and said 2 weeks ago, everybody in fantasy, everybody in the NFL world was like, Ayuk looks like he's getting back to 100%. That's all that was holding him back. Then Trent Sherfield's out there almost as much as Ayuk last week. There's something going on there.
Well, it's nothing new, though. He did it to Dante Pettis as well. I mean, Dante Pettis went from a guy who were like, he deserves a roster spot to, like, where is he
Don't
anymore?
put me in that group. Don't put me in that group. I hated Dante Pettis. I never liked Dante Pettis.
Well, he did put up fantasy viable numbers for a year
like
there.
3 weeks.
And then he's gone.
Yeah.
Ayuk's too talented, though, for me to completely throw the towel in. And it's not unprecedented to see a guy really get out of the gate sluggishly. I mean, DJ Moore is the classic example. Each of the last 2 years was not good in September. I mean, he figured that one out this year, obviously, but then ends up going on and having a good season. I'm not saying that might be the extreme example, but it would not surprise me if we righted the ship a little bit here, especially if Trey Lance does end up getting the start and then a la Justin Fields remaining the starter. There's a ton of upside in that offense.
So I want to talk about that real quick. This wasn't on the show sheet, but we've talked about the Trey Sermon situation before, and one of the things I keep hammering the table, and it was funny, last week, Bill Belichick answered this question in a press conference, and it took him about 7 hours to finish the answer because he's Bill Belichick, but it was about rookies and running backs, and just running backs in general and pass blocking. And what we kept talking about with Trey Sermon is that he did not have his quarterback under center that much at all in college. And a big part of learning pass blocking is also understanding the differences between a quarterback being under center and being behind and the shotgun next to you in front. So that could have been part of the reason that Sermon was struggling in the NFL. Trey Lance doesn't run under center. And we just saw how good Sermon was running with Trey Lance in that second half last week. This is where I'm going with it. I'm not saying start or don't start Trey Sermon. Is how concerned, Jeff, are you if Elijah Mitchell plays this week and going forward that Sermon could lose back to Mitchell being the guy, because he's looked good the past 2 weeks and looked really good with Trey Lance. But for all intents and purposes, Shanahan had no other option when he finally turned to Trey Sermon.
Boy, in thinking about it, too, Sermon played with some mobile quarterbacks the last couple of years at the college level. Boy, oh boy. But yeah, I think that Shanahan has made his mind up. Elijah Mitchell was the guy. And when he comes back, I don't think that changes. So Sermon, for me, is not very likely a startable option, but he at the same time is one injury away from another big role yet again. So he's a player you would keep on your bench.
Yeah,
I would not be planning on. What's up?
I said I already got called crazy because I said this is how I put it. I said as long as Lance is at quarterback, I'm trusting Sermon. and I put that in quotes because I'm essentially trying to trust Shanahan.
Yeah.
So I think, put it this way, if Shanahan goes the route with many people, I'm not the only one sitting here saying that. And as you said early in the show, Jeff, we're not the elite level of evaluating talent. But if I'm evaluating the situation and evaluating talent, Sermon should be the lead. Elijah Mitchell should be the change of pace pass catcher. And this could be very much like the Cardinals, but with, a 60-40 to Sermon side of it. If Lance is at quarterback, I keep saying that, if Lance is at quarterback. If Garoppolo comes back in, I think that flips. And I think it could flip back to 70% to Mitchell.
No, I could see that. I really hope for the 49ers, for everybody who's involved, that he does not come back under center. I know that people are going to call me crazy for that, but I've not seen anything special out of Jimmy Garoppolo to start the season out.
No, neither have I. You know what's funny about that is I said that Trey Lance, just pick him up and start him until Garoppolo comes back if you were playing the streaming game. Obviously, I'm not doing it for a top 10. And somebody's like, did you see those ducks he was throwing? I was like, and I don't get negative points for duck throws, but I do get positive points when he takes off running for 50 yards in a game.
Again, let's find the negatives. Here's a positive for you. He was a top 20 fantasy quarterback in a freaking half. I mean, what do you need? What I don't get the negativity, man. To start out my Sirius XM show, it's a quote from me. I sound sick. It's stupid, but I say this. Divorce yourself from the fan mindset. Here's what I mean by that. Fans are negative. Fans find everything wrong with everything, no matter what. I heard during the Eagles Super Bowl run on Sports Talk Radio, somebody call in and talk about how bad Doug Peterson was coaching in freaking November when they were 9-1 or whatever it was. That doesn't do us any good for fantasy. It really doesn't.
Didn't he win a Super Bowl?
He won the Super Bowl that year.
Yeah.
He won the darn Super Bowl that year. Now, granted, he doesn't have a job with them anymore, but he's still getting paid, baby. But that doesn't serve us any good. The positive here, he put up major points in one half of play. He has a high floor as a runner. Sure, it was busted coverage. You know what? They still scored the touchdown.
Hey, you know who else had busted coverage? Odell Beckham. What happened with that one? I'm pretty sure you're going to take the floater of a pass versus Baker Mayfield firing it past Odell Beckham at what could have been a giant touchdown, just like Debo's. True. And I was going to say that, Jeff, you know who was one better, though? Taysom Hill did it in less than a half because he did it. He was a top 20 quarterback on 6 touches?
Yeah. And Alvin Kamara, he got Derek Dilemma. And if you don't know what Derek Dilemma means, it's when you have a running back who has a very good day, but doesn't touch the ball as a receiver and doesn't score a touchdown. So therefore doesn't have a good fantasy day. I mean, 26 carries, he goes up over 100 yards. It's exactly what you want to see. He just doesn't score a touchdown and has no targets. So, it's not the best fantasy day, but I'm not really worried at all about that situation. It's just hope Taysom doesn't vulture anymore.
No. Wow, a lot of stuff going on with the Washington team today. Curtis Samuel's sidelined for Wednesday's practice. They said that he's being cautious, just as a heads up. He's still looking to work his way back. They signed Jay Sternberger off the Seahawks practice squad because they sent Logan Thomas to the IR. By the way, I didn't know Sternberger was on the practice squad for the Seahawks because I knew the Packers were done, but I didn't realize that's where he was. Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, all sideline or both sidelined at Wednesday's practice. So there's a little bit of updates for everybody right there. Question. Wes has already said he's benching Chris Carson. Would you start Marquise Brown or Cordell Patterson in a full point PPR?
I mean, Patterson, obviously. And I'm not joking.
Yeah. No, I think that's very simple.
Ride the wave. I don't believe it, but I'm still willing to ride the wave until we're proven otherwise.
Here's one. Should I trade Gibson and A.J. Brown for Aaron Jones and Robert Woods? I like getting the best player, but I think people are selling Antonio Gibson too low at this point. I think here's where I'm going to go with Antonio Gibson. And this is not to victory lap, people, but this is a lesson learned, perception. So I brought up Robert Woods on the Monday show with Chris Meany. I said, you can be a disappointment because of your ADP, but still have fantasy value. For me, Gibson's not a disappointment. I was not on board with the top 10 Gibson fan club this offseason. But if you were, he's been a disappointment, but he's still a top 20, easily probably top 15 running back. It's just the perception is that he's failing.
The ugly Todd Gurley year under Jeff Fisher. We all know it. We all remember it.
Jeff Fisher tried to ruin him that
But
year.
you could use him every freaking week. And that still has value. I understand that those types of players are not putting up the numbers that you want, but this is not Terrell Pryor with Washington. It's not a complete disaster where you literally cannot use the player. You can use Antonio Gibson. You can use Robert Woods. Scored a touchdown last week. That he looked pissed off. Sean McVay said that was more pissed off at the result for the team, not the result for his usage. But McVay did, and everybody now finally saw the blurb. He said they're going to prioritize it. I don't think Cooper Kupp's going to have 300 targets this year. You know, there's going to be Robert Woods games coming up, and we just have to.
He doesn't have a game without double-digit targets yet.
Yeah. Last week, you kind of came back to the pack from a productivity standpoint, but he's still a monster.
Hey, breaking news, Jeff. We are both inside the top 10 for accuracy on the season through the first 4 weeks.
Oh, there you go.
A virtual high five. Yay.
Yeah. Boom.
How about this is another one. This goes back. Caruso, I already got one of your questions. That Kittle owner, would you trade away Gronk for Galladay? Well, first of all, Gronk's hurt, so no question about it. But second part of it is you don't need a second tight end. With Kittle, people are worried about Kittle. Are you worried about Pitt? I'm buying
He had 11 targets last week.
I know. But again, this is perception.
My perception is he was heavily used. Trey Lance was looking essentially for two players. He was looking for Debo and he was looking for Kittle.
And that was it. That was
it. That was literally it. Yeah.
Here's another one I'm getting a lot of. Here's a good one. Do I trade Kamara to get McCaffrey? And I say, you see, you're kind of making the thought process I did without saying it. So I got a couple, would I trade Kamara for Barkley? And I said, no question. I want Barkley the rest of the way. It's not even close. Well, it's not even close for me to think about it. I'm doing that one, hitting accept every single time. The McCaffrey one, I say I still might want a little bit more. I have reservations about Kamara. People call me crazy in my week 3 sell high. And the fact that I was referencing Casey Joyner talking about the fact he's on pace for 50, 60 more touches than he ever has. And he's not being used in the passing game, as you talked about, Jeff. But if I'm going to get Christian McCaffrey, you're still absorbing the risk. Christian McCaffrey's not guaranteed to be back next week. You mentioned it 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the Chuba situation and said that Christian McCaffrey came back last year and immediately got hurt again. I do want to sell high on Kamara, but if I'm going to get McCaffrey, I'm not giving him a rock solid top 6 or 7 running back without a little bit more back.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You're buying a name for sure. You're going to feel good about yourself because you got the number 1 pick in your draft, but that doesn't matter anymore. You know, I'm running into this perception from fantasy draft season with other players too. Rashad Bateman, we talked about last week. I'm still getting why does everybody love Rashad Bateman? I know we did 8 weeks ago. It's not 8 weeks ago anymore, right? So perception at the time versus perception now has to change. I agree with you. I shake my head because I'm thinking about, is it fair? Yes. Would I do it? I don't know if it makes my team better. So I don't think that I do necessarily do it. I think your take on Saquon's really interesting too. He looks like Saquon Barkley, and that puts a smile on my face. It's just kind of now we're back in the comfort zone. He just doesn't come off the field. He's so good in the passing game. And are they going to be able to run the ball effectively? Probably not, but I'll take 12 or 13 carries for 55 yards and a touchdown every single week.
Yeah, you know whose offensive line can't do anything for him is Najee Harris. Najee Harris right now is RB5 on the season. I see people still worried about Najee Harris. Stop. Oh, my God. Here's one. Speaking of being worried, people are worried about CeeDee Lamb these past 2 weeks. They were super excited the first two. CeeDee Lamb's overtaking Amari Cooper. And then these past 2 weeks, it's like, oh, my God, what's going on with CeeDee Lamb? This is the Cowboys. They have multiple options. But here's why I want to add to this, Jeff, is because I don't think on surface level you're that concerned about CeeDee Lamb. I'm buying low on CeeDee Lamb. But Michael Gallup's about 2 weeks away. Do you think that CeeDee Lamb could be more frustrating than we expected for the entire year because of 2 tight ends and Zeke and Pollard and how much the Cowboys are now running this year on top of it?
I think that's the big one. That's the negative correlation. So if they have an effective day, they go for somewhere around 150 to 200 combined yards between Pollard and Elliott on the ground. What's Dak going to throw for? You know, last week, if you started Dak, you were okay because he bailed everybody out thanks to 4 passing scores, but he had under 200 passing yards. For a lot of quarterbacks, that's a disastrous day for fantasy purposes. So There is a little bit of concern there. I think if anything, Gallup might help the situation out, though, because it does give them some more versatility. Their original plan was to move those three all over the formation and then take advantage of mismatches. You can't quite do that with Cedric Wilson. So if anything, it might help. But buy low, sure. But buy low with the expectation that you're buying low on a wide receiver too, not this year's biggest breakout. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So here's another one for you. What do we do with Hollywood Brown? Or do you think this? Well, I'll always phrase it this way. Do you think this is sustainable? Because you mentioned Bateman and Sammy Watkins looks like he's going to be a non-factor. Mark Andrews is still up and down Mark Andrews, but this is one of the most limited. I mentioned this, Jeff. They are, I think, what, 6th or 7th to last still in pass attempts, but that's an improvement from last year when they were dead last and Lamar Jackson barely threw the ball. So that being said, do you try to sell high for Hollywood? I know earlier in that trade, obviously if you can get a Hollywood Brown in that kind of trade, you do it. But if you could get top 25 wide receiver value for Hollywood Brown, do you get out?
I would probably do that just because I don't like the Deshaun Jackson profile. You know, it's so inconsistent. Yes, you can have these big weeks, but when you have the week where he doesn't connect on the deep ball and he ends up with 2 catches for 25 yards, I know the immediate question, what's going on with Hollywood Brown? Well, nothing. That's the type of player he is. And if you don't realize that, you're not in for the roller coaster ride. It's the same answer I give for Tyler Lockett. This is going to be a wild ride. Buckle up. There's going to be a couple more big weeks, and there's going to be a few more bad weeks as well. And good luck predicting which is which. Same thing with Hollywood Brown.
So how about this? We have a situation from way back Thursday night. DJ Chark, unfortunately, out for the season. Marvin Jones, slight tick up, but Laviska Shenault, big tick up. The big problem was he was the 3rd wide receiver there. We don't usually do this on the show, Jeff, but how about a rank the rest of the season, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, and Hollywood Brown? How would you rank those 3 the rest of the way?
That's a good one. I don't love doing ROS rankings. A lot of people at FTN know this very well. Rankings, as Jake knows, take incredibly too much time to do. To do a whole set of rankings is just not bandwidth-wise feasible. Plus, the landscape changes so dramatically.
Thank you. That was part of my rankings column too. Is I said a lot of you guys asked me rest of the season, and I used Tim Patrick as an example. And I said Tim Patrick versus, and I forget the example I used for Tim Patrick. I think it was like Darnell Mooney. I said like last week I answered a question Tim Patrick versus Darnell Mooney. I said, if you need somebody for the next 3 weeks, it's Tim Patrick. But if you're telling me for the full season, it's going to be Darnell Mooney. So there's a lot of context there too. So I agree with you. But for kicks and giggles, as you would say, how would you?
I would say Jones is the number 1.
Okay.
I'm looking at my rankings this week to see. Actually, I have Brown ahead of Jones this week, but I do think
I do
Jones,
too. But it's close.
But it's just because there's no game they're going to play with the lead for long. I mean, I know they did play with the lead for a little bit this past week, but Urban had to get out to those bars afterwards, so it didn't last. It's close between Brown and Shenault, but they're very different profiles. Chenault's the type of player who week in and week out, like 4, 5, 6 catches, 70, 80. He's always going to be in that wide receiver 3 range of PPR, whereas Brown could be like a slate breaker. He could be a top 5 guy in given weeks, and then he could be wide receiver 70 the next week. So it's really what you want. I guess I would have to rank Brown just ahead of Shenault.
No, I'm glad you said that because I think that's the context people need. Because if your wide receiver 2 is Tyler Lockett, I want Shenault. Yep. If my wide receiver 2 is, a more consistent option, like I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, Allen Robinson.
Adam Thielen.
Yeah, Thielen, Robinson, or not Allen Robinson or Keenan Allen, but Keenan Allen. Then I'll take the upside of the Marquise Brown because it depends on your construction there. So Hollywood and Chris Carson for DJ Moore. Would you make that trade? Wes, this is part of the. So I want to bring this in here. I'm not coming for you, Wes, but goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show. If you missed it, I know Chris Carson is banged up this week, but Chris Carson would have to be at least my 4th running back, if not. My 4th, but also Damian Harris is right there to step. Like, I'm just not trading Chris Carson, despite the fact that, yes, DJ Moore, significant, much, much better wide receiver than Hollywood Brown, but you're still giving up a wide receiver 3 and a RB2 to get or a wide receiver 1. I'd have to be loaded at running back. I'm just not giving up running backs right now.
And I think this is the common dilemma for a lot of people with trading. Like, first and foremost, Wes, here's my response to would I trade? Does it make your team better? And I know that the Rat Pack folks are so annoyed with me asking that question, but it is an important question. I know it's an obvious question, but then why aren't we asking it all the time? Let's pivot in terms of how we're looking at this. Not should I accept this deal? Would you do this deal? Does this deal make your team better? And maybe it makes your team better at wide receiver, but you're sacrificing depth. So in one way, you make your team better. In another way, you make your team worse. I don't see how that overall makes you better. And a lot of trades end up that way. I got to trade an RB2 to get a wide receiver 2. So I shoot myself in the foot at running back to only get better at wide receiver. I'm trading whatever so that I can feel good about myself at tight end. By the way, nobody feels good at tight end. Even Travis Kelce had a bad game last week for fantasy purposes.
Here's a perfect example.
Worse in that
I'll give you this one. I pulled it up. This is in my ranks column this week. Would you trade Henderson for Ridley? On surface, just stop right there. We're all saying yes.
Sure.
However, my other running backs are CMC, Clyde Edwards, Lair, Melvin Gordon, Elijah Mitchell, and Hubbard. And I said, it's good value. It's good value. But no, I'm not doing it because you're risking your running backs who already have a lot of risk with Christian McCaffrey. Melvin Gordon's a timeshare. Elijah Mitchell might not get the lead back. Chuba Hubbard's going to be down as soon as Christian. So you offset with that. But I said, yes, the value is good, but it doesn't really improve your team because now you're just put a hole at running back.
And here's a way to improve that team. Instead of looking at that, let's go out and trade somebody lower for Sony Michel. Because when Henderson isn't on the field, Sony Michel is going to be on the field like crazy. And obviously vice versa, as we saw last week, that actually makes your team better by protecting your asset as opposed to leveraging that asset for another asset to make you worse at running back and slightly better at wide receiver.
Agreed. And I was in the middle of taking a sip of water over here, everybody. All right, what are we doing with the Bengals situation this week, Jeff, assuming T. Higgins is back? Because it sounds like he will be back. Are we just going straight as we were before and the fact that it's Chase, Higgins, Boyd is third, or did Boyd do enough the past 2 weeks to kind of muddy up the situation?
He's still what he has been. He's a slot receiver, so the ceiling just isn't as high. Less likely to see those end zone targets, less likely to see the higher ADOT targets. So for me, yeah, he's still behind him. And it does take the wind out of CJ's sails. If you were chasing last week's points, I would much rather have chased if Dawson Knox was somehow out there. I realize he wasn't in a lot of leagues. Or Dalton Schultz. I do think that's somewhat sustainable there for Schultz. I'm surprised, but you know what? I'm going to roll with it in that offense.
Schultz just keeps getting – it's similar to Adam Thielen and the Vikings is when they get into the red zone, they look for Dalton. It's Zach Pascal for the Carson Wentz situation. Yeah. When some players get the first eye of their quarterback, and that's something to look for. So let's talk about the Giants situation. I mentioned it when we were doing a little break there in the middle, is no Slayton, no Shepard. If no Slayton, no Shepard, Kadarius Toney get into your rosters, wide receiver 4, or is that too aggressive after what we saw last week?
It might be just a tad too aggressive, but I was impressed with the usage. I mean, we didn't expect him to be out there as a 3-down guy, and he was. We didn't expect John Ross. I love that play, too. It's like, hey, kid, run that way very fast, and Daniel's just going to throw it as far as he can.
That's all you're going to do. I was beyond shocked that they kicked Colin Johnson all the way down to 5th. Yeah, down behind CJ Board. I said this with Meany. He must be a bad locker room presence or something. Like he just proved that he had value the week before when they both went down. And not only did they activate and start Ross in front of him, start as in snaps and opportunities, they pushed him behind CJ Board.
Yeah, that one was a tricky one. There's something to this though going forward, and I don't know with Toney and with Ross. I mean, they're going to have to figure out a way to get him on the field. Even if it's just a couple shot plays, the defense knows it's coming. I still, can you defend that? The guy has sub 4.2 speed, basically. Can you really defend that? Probably not, even with the fast defensive backs in the NFL.
No, you send him deep on the one side, Kenny Dalglish deep the other side, and then Shepard or Toney's just obliterating you over the middle.
Exactly. Daniel Jones, not terrible right now. I'm just saying that. Not great, but not terrible.
I actually got that. Or who was it? It was Daniel Jones or somebody. Oh, God, what was it the rest of the season? I'm going to see if I can find it. It was Daniel Jones or somebody else, and I actually said, Daniel Jones or Joe Burrow, rest of the season. It's got to be Jones, right?
I've been impressed with Burrow. It's really close.
Of course. But I would say Burrow if they were still throwing 35, 40 times a game. The difference, so what it comes down to is that Burrow's the better quarterback. Daniel Jones is more risky. Similar usage, but Daniel Jones runs. Daniel Jones is like, he's going to run 30, 40 yards. And that's the tie break for me.
Yeah. I get you there. Yeah, Burrow's probably not going to run much this year. Maybe that comes back next year. But I can't blame him for not running this year.
For Phil Mike, for everybody, it's not Daniel Jones road and home. It's Daniel Jones game script. This is the same thing in Ben Roethlisberger for years. Drew Brees, the home road splits. He was still unbelievable he was still averaging 300 yards and 2 touchdowns per game on the road that year. It was just the fact that he was averaging 350 and 3 at home because he was ungodly at home. It's still great. It's about game script with Daniel Jones. Like I saw that pop up a lot lately, that people are like, Daniel Jones on the road. No, just look at who they faced on the road. That's what you need to look at. And
the road thing doesn't even matter anymore. Right now, road teams are actually they're winning over over home teams. Like, this is it. I don't think it's a thing. There is one thing with Ben Roethlisberger, though. Cincinnati, just the entire team. Anytime they go to Cincinnati, they're terrible. Like, I don't get it. It's like second closest stadium too. I don't know if Cleveland's closer. And you go there. There's not even, you don't have to fly, and they're terrible every time they play there. Every time.
Just pull up Google Maps and find out. All right, how about the Packers? I want to ask you about them. I didn't have them on the sheet, but I just remembered about this. Randall Cobb. Aaron Rodgers said, I want to use him more. He didn't lie to us. He wanted to use him more. Here's the problem, Jeff, and this is where I want to go with the question. Does it matter to you that he was on the field half as much as Allen Lazard? Is this just going to be like, I don't care? This is Cordell Patterson. I don't care. He's being used while he's out there, and Randall Cobb is the preferred option to Allen Lazard? Or are you still thinking that Lazard could have more value going forward?
I don't think Lazard's going to have value going forward. I think this team really is still going to run through the big three of Rodgers, Jones, Adams. I want to see it happen more than once with Randall Cobb before we start chasing it.
If you can only pick up one. If you can only pick up Cobb or Lazard.
I would pick up Cobb, but I wouldn't really like it.
No, neither would I. I mean, when was the last time he had 1,000 yards? It was like 2015 would be my guess.
He's a safety blanket for us for fantasy. The name you know, the name you think you trust.
He's essentially Cole Beasley now. And the same, like you might get that 1-2 touchdown game, but most games you're getting like that 60 yards. And that's kind of like, that's cool. Half point, full point PPR. Raiders, let's talk about them. So Peyton Barber, for everybody that might have missed it, went on the IR. And I'm not bringing up Peyton Barber for this reason. I'm bringing it up for a different reason, Jeff, is initially in my waiver column, I said, if you have to, again, 10-team league, you got to go pick up help somewhere else. I said, if you have to, you can drop Kenyon Drake because he's not even on the field when they're down in that last game. But now, with Peyton Barber on the IR, are we still holding on to Drake? Are we still doing that? Do we hate the Drake, or do we reluctantly hold on to the Drake?
The problem with Kenyon Drake is he got so thoroughly outplayed by Peyton Barber. And I really think that people need to let that sink in. He
should be in the group with like AJ Dillon and all the rest of the next men up, as in he's not necessarily rosterable.
Yeah. I would have him well below a bunch of those guys. I mean, I could be proven wrong, but when given the opportunity, that was the prime spot, right? Jacobs doesn't go, okay, just give Kenyon Drake the 3-down work. We saw him do it for spurts there in Arizona. Just give it to him. And he went with Peyton Barber, like the ultimate jag. I think that's all we need to know there. So I don't know if he's worthy of a roster spot right now. I'd rather grab somebody like Wayne Gallman. At least there's a little bit more uncertainty and the arrow's slightly pointing up as opposed to the other way around.
Okay. Before we get a few more questions before we get out of here, streamers of the week, Jeff, shouldn't even be a streamer at this point. Mr. Tyler Haneke is essentially Daniel Jones without the name. He is playing 100%, giving 100%, making mistakes, as Daniel Jones does, but he's running, he's aggressive, he's going to keep throwing. I think Tyler Haneke is in the conversation for fringe QB1 with Daniel. Like, if you like Daniel Jones, you have to like Taylor Haneke.
Taylor Haneke is what Gardner Minshew thinks he is in his head when he's running around in his backyard throwing the ball. And I love it. I am here for every bit of it. I do think, Trey Lance, he's very likely picked up at this point. But if he is out there, then certainly roll the darn dice on him. But I did also mention, if that's just too obvious, I am in on Daniel Jones. Yeah. Even though I do like Joe Burrow, I'm in on it. We were a year too early. I said last year I liked him as an upside guy. And it really is, Jake, like you mentioned, He said running ability. This dude is like deceptively very fast, and that helps. That's big time. Plus, now that he does have the weapons and finally the stability of Saquon Barkley, it's all starting to come together for fantasy.
Can you imagine if they had a semi-capable offensive line instead of all? Now Joe Judge is talking about rotating it again.
Oh boy, there you go.
Oh, so your tight end streamer of the week. I like this call.
Hunter Henry is my guy, and this is a product of a couple things. I think that from a football standpoint, he's outplaying Jonnu Smith. I realize Jonnu Smith's just the move, and Henry's playing in line. Henry basically doesn't leave the field. But also, it looks like he just has a better connection with Mac Jones, who I loved how they pointed out in the broadcast, like Mac Jones is running the Tom Brady offense. And you watch it and you're like, yeah, I get it is. There's nothing different here. And he's doing a reasonably good job at it. And we know how effective those tight ends were in that offense. So I'm going to keep rolling with Henry. If I don't have one of the top 12 options this week, he's my guy.
Yeah, I like that one. I also think I felt like similar to what you said is might be too obvious with Lance. I feel like mine might be too obvious, but Cameron Breit, a lot of people were excited about him last week, but he didn't get that much in the game. It was 2 for 29 or 30 or something like that. But that's why I'm going back to him. He ran the third most routes ahead of Antonio Brown. And let's also remember, this is back to the O.J. Howard situation. O.J. Howard's asked to block, and especially if they're running 3 wide with one tight end. It's Cameron Breit. So I think Cameron Breit, especially in this matchup this week, is a really nice play. Let me get, like I said, some of these questions in here. Need 2 for this weekend. He has Robert Woods, Tyler Boyd, Marvin Jones, Cortland Sutton, and Chenault. You got all those Woods, Boyd, Marv, Chenault, and Sutton. Which 2 are you going with, Jeff?
It looks like Jones and Boyd are at the top of my list. I have Woods behind Boyd, and then the rest are behind those guys.
I'm going to split one difference on you. If T. Higgins is out there, I'm going with Marvin Sutton. I love some Sutton. I'm trying to buy him low every single place I can. Top 5, actually number 1 now, because Devontae Smith offset some of his yards last week, but number 1 in unrealized air yards. And if that one play last week, actually Aldo Beckham's now inside the top 10 because of that one wonderful play of what could have happened. Something to look at. I don't mind either one of them as you have, but all right, so let's say Carson is out for this one, Jeff. Collins over Marvin Jones or Cooks in a half-point PPR?
Not over Marvin Jones. My concern with
I'm not
Cooks,
going over either one of them.
Yeah,
if that's
really
Cook's floor,
close.
if that's Cook's floor
true.
in a downpour with throwing 4 interceptions, this is why I loved Cook so much this year. That's his floor.
Yeah, I'm trying to eye up where I would put Collins. Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would just stay the course.
Love some Brandon Cooks. Winning championships this year. All right. How about this? Start 3 in a full point PPR. Hubbard, Hunt, Jacoby, AJ Green, and Damian Williams. All right, so Damian Williams is a must start. We already established that. So 2. Start 2 from Hubbard, Hunt, Myers, and Green. In a PPR, Jeff.
Not Green. It would be Hunt.
And then Hubbard versus Myers.
I guess I'd have to go Hubbard. I don't love it. I mean, Myers is he'll get you 6 catches for 60 yards, but he's never going to score a touchdown. Literally will never score a touchdown.
We have to have fireworks celebration if Jacoby Myers ever scores a touchdown. For everybody out there, he hasn't scored a touchdown in his career yet. No, he still has 0 touchdowns to his career.
Has he thrown for a touchdown?
I don't know. That's a good question.
That would definitely be a record. If he's thrown for a touchdown as a wide receiver and then not scored one.
Now I'm curious. Now I'm going to pull up Pro Football Reference and find out before we get out of here for the show. Let's see. Let's see if we can get his entire career. So he's got 2 for 9 rushing. He's got, by the way, he has 1,300 yards to his career, and he still hasn't. Does the passing stats? Oh, here we go. Passing for Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers. Passing has 2 attempts, 2 completions for 43 and 45 yards. No touchdowns. Wait, who said they throw the touchdown? It has no touchdowns here. Where do you have the touchdown? Mike Denorian, tell me what game. Tell me what game he threw the touchdown in. Now I'm super curious. That's great, Jeff.
We're not saying Jeff. Ever here because we know he was a converted college quarterback, but
right
at the pro level.
Yeah, at the pro level. I see it. Let's see. I got no. Yeah. See. Oh wait, I found him. Never mind, Mike. I found him. He has 2. He threw for 2 last year. There you go. 2 touchdowns. Got the answer.
So
Jacoby Myers.
Upside there.
2. Not even Jeff. Your trivia question is not just 1 and 0 receiving touchdowns. That's throwing for 2 touchdowns and 0 receiving.
Yeah, that's amazing right there.
Before we get out of here, good question. Last one of the day. Trey Lance versus Tyler Haneke this week. Jeff, who you got?
Lance.
I'm with you, and I love Haneke, but Trey Lance, Jeff said it, half of a game, finishes a top 20 quarterback. If you want full information, make sure you're following at Jeff at Ratcliffe, Jeff Ratcliffe, and over at FTN, and over at theathletic.com/BetsTV for your first free month, all capitals. If you do this, look, I promise I'll check in. I said I'll check in tonight, being Wednesday, by Thursday Night Football. Need some more comments in the video, so drop a question you have in the comments after the video. Like these comments that you're doing right now don't show up because this is only live. So if you have a question afterwards, I'll go back and answer it because we're trying to get some more traffic for us, more shows, more love. We appreciate you guys. We'll see you next week.